Hi, everyone. Welcome to INTS 499, the Capstone experience for the International Studies program at SIUE. Today, we will have three presenters, and we will go in alphabetical order. We will have Joseph Brooks, then Elise Freak, and Sarah Zick. So I think they should present themselves. And their area of study and their pathway of specialization within the International Studies program, because they know best what they have worked on. I will be recording this session and then save the link and post it on my YouTube channel. Just for everybody, please mute your microphones while there are student presentations. And of course, for the students, after they are done, they should mute their own microphones. Well, without further ado, let's see. Joseph will be the first one. The floor is yours.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So my name is Joseph Brooks. My focus in international studies has been relations and diplomacy. In particular, what I want to do after graduation is going to be going to some kind of work to counter human trafficking, whether as an analyst or as an agent of some kind. And then I'm trying to figure out how to put my presentation up on the Zoom right now.
At the bottom, you have a button that says share a screen. If you have any video or something, make sure that you click also on, that option to maximize the sound.
I have to share this.
Select, share your screen. It's the first option on the left.
I'm doing it. May not be able to record it. I can do that later.
Well, you need to share your screen.
Yeah, when I initially clicked it, my laptop popped
it's working.
Sort of security thing. You guys can see it?
Yes.
Awesome. I need to move this bar somewhere. There you go. Now I can hit play. All right. Can I move? I can't. I think I'm gonna have to just deal with the Zoom bar covering things. So for my application project, I made a report on human trafficking in North America, which has two goals. First goal is just to provide general knowledge on human trafficking in North America, as well as solutions at a federal or governmental level, and that solutions that things that we can do as individuals. There you go. And this is going to be a sensitive content warning here because it does talk. I will be talking about a lot of ill treatment of children, as well as sexual abuse and other things of that nature. So anyone is welcome to mute me if needed. Starting off with some personal statements from surviving victims. From Sierra: I don't know how long it went on, how many men raped me. I just remember fainting many times from the pain. I was praying to die. I disconnected from my body. When I came to my senses, I couldn't walk or sit. From Sam: the sexual abuse started first when I was about 3 years old. At least that was my first memory of it. My father told me this was what boys did with their dads. This is how dads teach boys about their bodies. I didn't question any of it because this was my father and this was my concept of what fathers did. I assumed he loved me. And Hannah: during that time, many men purchased me. I'm sure some were from the military because the Coast Guard was close. There were also law enforcement officials. One even came in his uniform. My old world was gone. I just became a different person in a different world with, it seemed, no way out. I hope that gives some idea of the trauma that these victims can go through. And especially with Sam having been at 3 years old about there are no bounds when it comes to human trafficking. Here's some terminology things I have up here that I just wanted to briefly show that I'll be using throughout my presentation. Now, what is human trafficking? Human trafficking is defined by the UNODC, or the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime. The recruitment, transportation, harboring, or receipt of people through either force, fraud, or deception with the aim of exploiting them for profit. Now, there's two main forms of human trafficking. There's labor exploitation and sexual exploitation. And other forms of exploitation involve forcing someone to marry or begging, as well as forcing anyone to do any other criminal action for them instead of the trafficker doing the illegal act. They have the victim do so. And I have myths and truths here. I'm only going to go over one myth just to save time, and that's going to be that human trafficking is also often perceived as a physical action of like kidnapping someone and selling them off to be exploited or something of that, somewhere around there, which is a very rare instance, and much more often, in reality, much more often occurs through either grooming, manipulation, false lies, or threats of financial threats to keep the person in their trafficked situation. Beginning with how human trafficking really works, I'm going to start with grooming. Grooming has several aspects to it. Usually the victim would have it be in an unstable environment or circumstance, such as a war-torn area, unstable housing, or like an abusive parents for a child. There needs to be trust. The trafficker needs to develop trust with their target to be victim, and that is, they get that trust by having access to their target, and the access can be being able to physically be with that person and talk to them, or even just as much as sending a private message over social media. And with those, that the trafficker can manipulate their victim however they need to get their victim, their target, wherever they need to be, whether it's to them or to get their target to some other location, to then entrap them. And they also don't, the victim, to be victim target, doesn't need to actually physically move themselves. It can even include pictures being sent over the internet as well. Now, who is at risk? Everyone is at risk, especially when drugs are one method of use to help keep people entrapped, keep people in their trafficking situation. But for those who are most vulnerable are going to be people who are already drug abusers, people who are children who are run away from home, or have people who live in poor environments, which probably puts children at greater risk if they're in poor environments, because parents will sometimes end up selling their children into traffickers to get a source of money because they don't make a livable income. Now, this is a very generic stages I have here on how trafficking works. This person will have a need or inability that they have a hard time or completely unable to meet for themselves. So a trafficker will build trust with that person. This person will now be their target, and they will build their trust. Trafficker will then provide for this person's needs or inabilities. And then from there, that trafficker now has met generally speaking, has met all the criteria needed to make that person a victim and keep them as such. Now, to get into the extent of human trafficking, this is an economic cycle provided by a Rachel Brown, who has also done some research on this matter on the Ballard Brief, which is which is an academia site. But you can see on the diagram that there's the demand for victims allows for an increase of supply. Greater the supply, cheaper the service can be provided. Supply being victims. And the service that is being sold can be sold cheaper because of the greater supply, in which a decrease in supply allows for more people to purchase the service, or more of the service, and it just goes round and round. Another thing I want to mention with this is, as of 2018, estimated profits for just sexual exploitation aspect of human trafficking, is 150 billion in 2018. And to compare that to the video game industry in 2018, which made 19 billion less, 131 billion is what the video game industry made. And to continue with the sexual exploitation aspect in 2018, I said made 150 billion, estimates at least put it that. And in 2018, only about half of victims were sexually exploited. So if there's a direct comparison to the other half of victims, that means human trafficking in all has made about 300 billion in profit in 1 year. Into what labor exploitation is, or where it occurs mostly in Africa, the Middle East, and Southwest Asia, and rest of the world is more prominent with sexual exploitation, especially what I'll be talking about today, the EU and North America. And generally speaking, females are sexually exploited while males are exploited for labor. And I want to specify with children here, the percentage of girls being trafficked has nearly doubled since 2004, and for males, it has increased 5 times for boys. Here are some general statistics on the United States situation. Main takeaway from this slide is going to be that while number of cases has doubled since 2015 to 2021, there are less victims per case. Overall, more victims, but less victims per case. And while more and more victims are being found and helped, there has been a significantly decrease in convictions. Conviction rates have been dropping at a fairly steady rate, and since 2018. And grand majority of cases that involve human trafficking crimes are outright dismissed. For Canada has a lot of similar things I just mentioned with the US, but something a little bit different is for police reported incidents in particular has been steadily increasing since 2011. In over a 6-year time period, 2014-2020, there have been 4.3 million reports of child sexual abuse or exploitation in some manner. And these reports can be involving the same individual, same kid, same situations, but 4.3 million is a large number nonetheless. And a quarter of parents witness inappropriate behavior towards their child. And for females, most females in Canada are exploited, trafficked between the ages of 18 and 24. And for males, the largest portion is between 25 and 34. And as you can see here, with these cases for Canada, about 200 have been dismissed. This is for 2021 alone. About 200 were dismissed, while 80 actually resulted in a conviction. Now, how is the US and Canada countering human trafficking? It's a great question. Beginning with the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 has the Reauthorization Acts, as well as 2003 and 2005, and these other legal actions as well afterwards, are all changes or additions to this original 2000 Act. They all give specifications and adjustments to how human trafficking is treated, on how it differentiates from things like kidnapping or just outright rape, and as well as sets out minimum punishments for various crimes. And it gets to be very specific on, say, if a person is brought from California to Illinois, then there would be that would in itself be involved as a domestic trafficking situation, rather than if someone was just taken from their home, if you want to get into a physical season of it. And that could just be kidnapping. Now, the NAP, or National Action Plan, from the White House, as well as the DoD's, or Department of Defense, instruction to combat human trafficking, both have very general plans, or ideas of what they want to do and what the focus is for their efforts. And generally speaking, it's going to be to prevent, protect, prosecute, and improve effectiveness of countering measures. And a lot of this is done, a lot of the prevention protection methods are done through educating the population. That is the biggest focus. Educating the population and actively seeking out the traffickers are the main focuses of the United States. The U4U program is a program to help allow for safe migrations and allow for asylum for Ukraine citizens for their war. There's also the HSI, which is a subdivision of DHS. DHS is the Department of Homeland Security. HSI is Homeland Security Investigations, which investigates cases relating to human trafficking and other cases, but human trafficking as well. They also have increased, their main goal right now is increasing personnel to combat human trafficking, take on more cases, and to be able to help more people themselves rather than sending them somewhere else to be helped. FLETF is the Forced Labor Enforcement Task Force, which they mostly just monitor for importation of goods that are prohibited because they're known to be produced through forced labor. And CCHT is the Center for Countering Human Trafficking for the DHS, and they oversee the bulk of what the United States government does to counter human trafficking. There are also victims, survivor victims also act as consultants. For Canada, you have their own national action plan, very similar to the US, very on about just protecting the civilians and increasing protection, providing more aid for victims as well. And in general, Canada is much more focused on a communal effort towards countering human trafficking and victim support. This is largely done from the Canadian Federal Fund, Victims Fund, hackathons. Hackathons are much more student-oriented, where students and IT professionals as well will get together and work on making technological improvements, creating systems to help counter human trafficking, find victims, things of that nature. And Feminist International policy is assistance policy. Those are all things that are, it's a lot of funding from the government as well as charitable donations that will go mostly towards supporting victims, aiding them, as well as getting them what's the right word? Immunity, and giving them immunity from any crimes they may have committed while being trafficked. Project Protect. Project Protect, it has a lot of financial analysis to help pretty much follow money trails to find organized crime individuals and trafficking trafficking victims. They also work with a group called FinTrack, which is another financial analyst organization for the government as well. They work together to do that. The justice system goals for Canada, they want to host international conferences. They bilingual training, and a lot of training this is for law enforcement officers as well as citizens alike, because it is open to the public. And they also want to want more legal protections for victims as well. The Canadian Center to End Human Trafficking pretty much the same goals as the National Action Plan of providing more protection for migrants in particular, but as well as for victims and getting them funding to get back into survey on their own rather than being reliant on someone. Project Recover and the CPC-SC, both programs to help with their main focus is on supporting victims. And then Canada has their own national human trafficking hotline. The US as well has a national human trafficking hotline. For North America as a whole, for the United States and Canada, they have the similar issue of children being trafficked at a much greater increase of rate, which is probably likely from increased use of technology and being able to groom over social media. The immigration status, genders, and age in which people are brought into trafficking are fairly unknown and vary by area, vary by state. Escort services and pornography are the greatest uses for sexual exploitation. And North America and Canada have different focuses on countering human trafficking, while Canada focuses much more on migration and victim support, victim protections. The US has much more emphasis on educating the population and increasing manpower to work on human trafficking cases. Now I'm comparing the North America to the EU because the EU has a lot of the same issues as North America, which is sexual exploitation is most prominent in the EU. And especially when it comes to minors, before Brexit, if including the UK, the trafficking of minors is the absolute worst in the UK, and has also been increasing like North America and the EU as well. Technological advancements have also been improving over time for organized crime. Human trafficking is an organized crime, and technological advancements has allowed that to be greatly improved and expanded upon on an international scale in the EU. And these similar advancements have caused issues in North America as well. Member states of the EU and North America are all destination countries. This means that victims end up in these areas. They'd be something like someone coming from, say they're migrating from Venezuela and they're trafficked either on their way to the United States or they become a victim shortly after coming to the United States and they came willingly. Either way, they end up in one of these nation states. For how the NA differs from the EU in countering human trafficking, the EU does not counter human trafficking on its own like North America does. North America puts a lot of focus specifically on human trafficking, while the EU focuses on taking down organized crime. And this is a system called the SIS, which I'll mention in a minute here, but that is the Schengen Information System that the EU uses to connect its law enforcement agencies, as well as Interpol and the ILO, International Labor Organization, to it acts as a database to connect all these agencies to connect their individual information all into one source, so that it can improve joint investigations and more easily determine who is a part of these criminal organizations and who might be being trafficked. So for my big picture propositions, things that need to be done at a state level. North America, big thing is North America needs a system like the SIS that I just mentioned. While it may not be as effective as the EU's, because the EU has 20 some states that is connecting, as well as the ILO and Interpol in all their state and local federal law enforcement officials. This would just be between the United States and Canada, which which would still be connecting all the local, state and federal law enforcement officers, and have a single database between both nations, with all their human trafficking related cases, or as well as it will also help determine how bad organized crime is in the US, because right now, at least through a human trafficking standpoint, how severe it is with human trafficking compared to how severe human trafficking is with organized crime, compared to just individual traffickers, is not well known, because the focus in North America has been just cracking down on human trafficking alone. The US also needs a more dedicated human trafficking center. Right now, it's a part of the Department of Homeland Security. And this is more of a rough idea I've had, but if the Center for Human Trafficking wasn't part of the DHS, it would allow more funding to be directly pulled to that center. It will be more people, instead of having people focus on human trafficking as well as other tasks for that Homeland Security is worried about. It'll be made up of personnel solely dedicated to human trafficking as well, not made up of personnel with split focuses. And to help decrease this, to help break up the economic cycle that I talked about much earlier on, we can decrease the supply by improving quality of life and fostering development in the origin nations, which are nations that these people come from to come to the destination nations. Even if it doesn't, that can be long-term goals focused on improving that nation's ability to make an income and architectural as well as educational developments over time for that nation. Or it can also be sanctuaries that get built as well, especially for women and children to go to have at least a safe haven, some sort of safety net. So there's not as much of a need to take a risk to come to a destination country in North America or the EU. And that'll help. The idea of that is to help reduce the supply to then reduce the supply and up the cost of services. So hopefully services are in less demand. Ideally, that is what would happen. Now, what can we do as individuals? As individuals, first thing is that we all need to understand and be able to recognize human trafficking. Hopefully this presentation has helped to do that. My report also goes more in depth, so that can help even more. And I'm going to skip a bit, spreading awareness. With understanding and being able to recognize it, you can help others understand and recognize human trafficking as well. Spreading awareness and having more people be aware that it is indeed an issue will allow a little bit more community involvement, I guess, as well, and more for individuals to do their own little part in, even if it's just having the ability to report a possible trafficking situation, report to their local law enforcement agency, or sheriff's department, that this person may be being trafficked at the moment. Always be mindful of how you utilize the internet. After all, that's been the main cause for children being trafficked more and more over the last couple decades. Which, if you have children, definitely teach them about internet safety. Stranger danger is a very real thing here. It may be nice to have friends over the internet, but that does not mean that they should be meeting up with these friends. That also includes if children may be told to by the trafficker, or just not feel it necessary for whatever reason to tell an adult that some conversation that shouldn't be happening is happening. and they wouldn't necessarily tell you. So always make sure to, if you have children, make sure you monitor them on their internet usage. And always use proper and legal means of transportation, employment, and transactions. Transactions would be anything of paying for something like using Facebook Marketplace, or if you just meet someone out and about and you agree on a trade of some sort. Make sure there is some legal or proper basis for it, or some safe measure for that transaction, and nothing similar, whether it's online or going to a, I guess, dark back alley type situation. Those are things that can also get you there too. And transportation is, especially when it comes to overseas flights, especially since we're all in the US, if we're traveling somewhere, make sure you are also taking safe means to travel back to the US. Traveling back would be the more important portion here. Sorry, my dog. And I believe that is all I have here. And here are all of my references. I have 35 references here. I'm not sure if we're doing questions or not.
Yes, thank you very much. I am interested in if people have questions. I wanted to say from the very beginning that this is very important work, and you worked a lot. It's good that you can remember so easily some of these acronyms, because I think you are interested in such a topic and in such a line of work. I can tell you that I have been, as professor of public relations, involved with an organization from St. Louis a few years ago. They were trying to help, ask for our resources in students to promote their campaign for a safe house for battered women and victims of sexual predation. And actually, they had these bracelets. Tell me about 13. That they were selling to make funds for themselves, saying that at the age of 13, the young women are at very big risk, because they are usually, recruited in malls when they go with friends or by themselves, just because they are bored. They are recruited by older women who have been through this system, and they are enticed with, oh, don't you want to be independent? Don't you want to have your own money? And so on and so forth. And that's how they find the pathway into such a business. So indeed, it's a problem of the modern world, of the haves and have-nots of the world. Whenever there is war, whenever there is a government that is dismantled somewhere in the world, then their own population becomes, it creates the right conditions, right in inverted commas, of course, right conditions for trafficking, for work, or for sex work. So it is a very complicated problem, and I commend you for your efforts, and I would like you to think about how you would like to develop such a paper, how you would like to maybe continue on this line of work. Maybe you will think about finding a job that fulfills these requirements, but also think about a master's degree. Think about a place like PAPA at SIUE, the public administration master, in which you could fit for something like that. Well, you should decide for your own future, but the seeds of developing something more are already there. So I open the floor for any questions from anybody who would like to ask Joseph any questions. Joseph, if you can get out of the sharing screen so we can see the speakers. I think River wants to ask something.
Stop sharing.
Yes. You have to unmute yourself, River, if you want to ask something. No? Just nod. Okay, anybody else?
Okay, yeah, I was just waiting until he got his screen unshared. I had a question of, like, you mentioned Okay. Joseph, you had mentioned about how a lot of the cases in the US just kind of get dropped. Like they may get reported, but only um you said 80 something actually ended up in convictions. And you had mentioned like crossing state lines or whatever. Whenever human trafficking cases cross state lines, is that one of the main reasons why it becomes much more difficult because different states have different trafficking laws, or is it just because it's a further distance for like investigators to cover?
I was just giving an example with trying to distinguish like a case of someone is moved from California and they go to Illinois, come to Illinois, and uh, for the and say they're sexually exploited here, and they were encouraged by some means to make that move by the trafficker. That would be a trafficking case, whereas a difference from kidnapping is uh, they may just be is moved much more locally, maybe even just the same city, and uh, more likely if they're being kidnapped, they're also being physically taken, which is much less which is a very rare case for human trafficking for victims to be physically seized. In terms of answering the part of cases being dismissed, um, one thing I can do is look even more into the laws. Because there's hundreds of pages on the laws and the acts. But I think part of why conviction rates have been dropping at fairly steady rate over the last several years is because what is being considered as trafficking is being much more is being made much more specific and less broad, and that is made for while those trafficking charges are still brought up, more of those charges are being dismissed, and thus those cases being dismissed because they don't quite fall under the pretense set by the new laws, new acts. However, whether it's still trafficking or not is up for your own interpretation, probably.
And I
All right,
think
thank you.
actually when weapons, but also persons who are abducted or brought into prostitution are crossing state lines, that becomes a federal matter, and you can involve FBI in situations like that. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Any other question for Joseph?
One thing I could add that you mentioned earlier about once especially girls turn 13, most children who are trafficked are between 12 and 16.
Yeah, I understand that actually past the age of 16, 17, they are considered too old.
Once they turn 18.
Yeah, or something like that. Yeah, it's extraordinary in the modern world to have to face such situations and problems. But indeed, we need a clear legislation and more coordination, like you were observing towards the end of your presentation, that maybe some organizations that exist in the European Union or in Canada are even more effective because they are centralized.
Yes.
And of course, there is this communication between nations through Interpol, the international police. So there are agreements between different states, especially European Union and Western countries and the United States and Canada, of sharing information that they have on certain cases. Okay, anybody else? So we can move to the next presenter. Going once, going twice. Thank you very much, Joseph. You can mute your microphone, and we will still be in contact, you and me, for your final paper that you're working on. So now we will listen to Elise Frick. She will tell us something about herself and about her paper.
Hi, I'm Elise, and I am studying international relations and diplomacy.
Lee.
And my my project is over Eastern Europe. So, and like after I graduate, I will be moving to Berlin. Let me share my screen. And I will start. Okay, I will. Okay, can you see this? Okay, so I'm Elise, and I'm going to be doing my presentation over the themes of Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Here's my table of contents. I'm going to be talking about the purpose, backgrounds, methods, my first theme, which is nostalgia, and my second theme, which is nationalism. So first off, my purpose is to analyze the socioeconomic and political themes in Eastern Europe, specifically focusing on Hungary and Poland. When the region went from socialist communist to capitalist after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. I also want to emphasize acknowledging the good does not negate the bad and vice versa. I'm going to give some background at first over the Cold War, just in case if you don't know. It is a bipolar system with two spheres of influence. The first sphere is the US capitalist sphere that you can see in blue. And then the second sphere is the Soviet socialist communist sphere, which you can see in red. So Eastern Europe fell under the Soviet influence, and then after the fall of the wall, Eastern Europe had to transition to capitalism. And then I used data, graphs, documents, academic journals, websites, and books for all my research. My first theme is nostalgia, post-communism and socialism. And I'm going to talk about women during socialism in Eastern Europe. So in under the Soviet influence, women's education and social programs really were more valued because they had like longer maternity leaves and childcare. And that was mostly due to the fact that they wanted to push women into the workforce and keep them there for longer. And because if women were in the workforce, you could double your workforce by doing that. However, that also caused a double burden, with women being responsible for work inside and outside of the home. But at least women were also not as economically dependent on men, which was seen as a plus side. And I used this book on the right, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism, for most of this research under this topic, due to the fact that like I really enjoyed it, and it's very eye-catching, but it does not have anything to do with what the title says. So but yeah, and then women during capitalism, they kind of lost themselves because they were pushed back into the home. They had more of the typical gender roles that they were not used to. They were financially dependent on men again, and that made sex and money linked. And that kind of put them into like some uncomfortable situations that they might not be able to leave. And when they did decide to go back into the workforce, though, the employers were like, I won't, like, why would I hire a woman if I could hire a man? So to make employers want to hire them, they either had to be docile or they had to lower their pay, which also widened the wage gap in the free market. In Hungary, they saw nostalgia with collective memory. So in the Kadar era was during the Cold War, and it was looked at as a very prosperous time for Hungary, specifically in older generations and blue-collared workers that have the most nostalgia. You can see in the graphs. And it's mostly due to the fact that one, older generations can remember, and specifically they kind of remember more of their childhood. And two, because Marxism and theory, at least, respects has like a lot of respect for manual labor, and most of that has to do with blue-collar workers, and they tend to not go to college and tend to just go into the workforce immediately, or they study a trade. So in Poland, the two main themes are affordability and brand loyalty. So capitalism gave them more options when shopping. However, communism gave them the ability to shop. So through that though, it was like everything got more expensive. They couldn't afford stuff. But like under communism, at least, it was like it was bad, but it was bad for everyone. So that kind of created more of a group solidarity with that. And it was like nobody was like super rich. Everyone could just get by. Everyone was helping each other. So, you know, and then whenever they went to capitalism, it was like they redistributed the wealth and it mostly went to the younger generations. So specifically the older generations were kind of left, and they were like they were so used to having the social programs and they couldn't fall back on those either. So they ended up being like couldn't be able to afford the basic necessities of like food or healthcare. So, you know, and then with brand loyalty, they saw nostalgia through consumerism and through the census. So they would buy communist trinkets, hammer and sickle merch. They would eat foods from the past, would watch old TV shows. And yeah, now I'm going to talk about nationalism and the rise of the right. They saw a rise of the populist conservative parties and white nationalism in the Fidesz party in Hungary and the Peace Party in Poland. The main guy in Hungary is the Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. His rise to power started in 1998 with his first term, but that didn't last long though, as the Socialism Party took over for 2 terms. But in their second term, they had the 2008 financial crisis, and that and the policies that went with it kind of got blamed onto the Socialism Party. So the people wanted something new, so they turned back to Orban. So he won in 2010, and then he made a coalition with the KDNP, which is also another conservative party, and they had a 2/3 supermajority in parliament, which just so happens is what you need to change the constitution. And Hungary always wanted to change the constitution after the fall of communism. It was just like they thought it would take a lot longer, and they like a lot longer to get the 2/3, and also a lot longer to change the constitution to remake it up. But Orban changed it within a year, and then it was enforced the next year. So he did that pretty fast. And part of the policies are that he changed the number of parliament members from 386 to 199, which made him have the ability to gerrymander the political districts to try to keep him in power. He also controlled the judicial system and the media. So, for instance, like you have to be pro-government, you have to be pro-Fidesz, or else if you aren't, you were probably going to get shut down or you're going to get fired. So there was like a mass exit of judges whenever he got into power. He got elected in 2010. And then he put in all like pro-Fidesz judges, and same with the media. So like they saw a drop in both law and media and press for freedom. And then same with like the loyalty with the oligarchs. So he gained loyalty with them to try to keep in power. And you can see that here with the percent of Fidesz members in Hungary's parliament that in 1998, which is on the left, he only had like a little bit under 40% of loyalty. So he didn't have that much. And then whenever he got reelected in 2010, he got like 53%. So he had a lot more loyalty, a lot more stability. And then with him changing the percent of parliament members and gerrymandering, he has gained members in parliament, or like the percent. So I'm going to talk about some of their policies and what they believe in. So they believe that they want to protect the Hungarian culture and identity by having it all like homogenous, which is white, straight, and Christian. They're anti-immigration and anti-Muslim. So they have strict immigration regulations, specifically in 2015 with the Syrian refugee crisis. They had strict like the quota for immigrants, and also the immigrant asylum. And then they also built a fence on the southern border to try to keep them out. They're also anti-gay and anti-gender, mostly with the Constitution again. In the Constitution, it states that a marriage is between a man and a woman, and that the man has to be like is a husband and the woman is a wife and whatnot. So yeah. And then here is their human freedom index. You can see that there is an exponential decline after 2010 when he took power, in both rank and score, and even in score it underpassed the region and almost hit the world. So, and then so the Human Freedom Index measures civil, economic, and personal freedom in from 2010 to 2012, which is only 2 years of him being in power. The rank went from 30th to 40th, and the score went from 8.42 to 8.09. Hungary is the third most deteriorated freedom score from 2007 to 2020, with the difference of negative 1.24. They're only behind Syria and Nicaragua, and everyone else on the list has a lot more civil unrest in the country. So they're kind of unique. And then I'm going to talk about Poland. So Poland saw a rise in the peace power and the peace party. They have a good relationship with the Catholic Church, and that helps them because 87% of the Poles are Catholic. But that also means that they mix church and state a lot. So, and then the peace party won with President Duda in 2015 and Prime Minister Morawiecki in 2017. And you can see that the percent of peace members in parliament, there's a spike in 2015, but they've kind of died down, so they don't have the strength as Fidesz does. But their policies, at least, are they're very aligned with Fidesz. A lot of their politicians and leaders have said that being gay is worse than communism. It is filled with pedophilia, and it is against family values. So a lot of gay people do not feel safe in Poland. And then same with abortions. They're very anti-abortion. And in 2019, with the help of peace elected judges, Poland banned fetal defect abortions, which made up 95% of their abortions. So they practically banned all abortions. And that outraged women, and it had a lot of protests and outrage, and that kind of is why that you see a decline in loyalty. And then they're also anti-immigrant and minority, and they're kind of the hub for white supremacy. So they're known for having their neo-Nazi concerts and other white supremacy meetings. And here is Poland's Human Freedom Index. You can see like there's a steady steadiness to the rank until about 2015, where all of a sudden it just takes a dip. And you can kind of see that parallels with Fidesz. So I'm guessing that if they could keep in power like for another half of a decade, you could see that the score would maybe underpass the region as well. And from 2014 to 2020, the rank dropped from 34th place to 49th place, and that score dropped from 8.33 to 7.66. The personal freedom categories dropped more than 1% in less than a decade, more than a point in less than a decade, including assembly, law, religion, expression, and information. And here are my conclusions. They saw a rise in nationalism with women and the older working class, specifically with affordability and brand loyalty and the group solidarity as a whole. They also saw a rise in nationalism with the Fidesz party in Hungary and the Peace Party in Poland. However, that also meant that they saw a decline in freedom. And then I just wanted to leave off on this question, how much can freedom decrease until people start to notice or care? And thank you. This is my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Elise. Also, I remember when you started the discussion with me about the topic, because I'm originally from Romania, I know a lot about these nations, because Romania was also in the Warsaw Pact. And I have been through Poland, I have been through Hungary, I have, because I worked for the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Education of Romania before coming to the United States. I was in, different discussions and exchanges with these nations. So, I know what was happening. Actually, I took a group of students from the Department of Applied Communication Studies in 2012 in 2014, sorry, to Germany and to Hungary. So we stayed in Budapest for a week. It was interesting to see how life was going on in the streets, it is true what you observed over there. I think there can be even more emphasis can be put on the national history and realities of each of these two countries. Both were at a certain time in their effective memory of the nation empires. There was a Polish Empire, but deeper in the past, that was dismantled, and Poland, because of Russia and the Germans, at a certain moment disappeared from history for 100 years. Hungary was dismantled by the Turks at a certain moment, but then after they did this duality association with the Austrian Empire, they became the Austro-Hungarian Empire under the Habsburg family, and they reached their maximum territorial development until the end of the First World War. There is a lot of nostalgia connected not only to communism, but to the times when they had a bigger territory and when they, considered themselves to be a force to be reckoned with in Europe. So they are trying now to reconquer those territories economically, but by insisting too much on nationalism, actually they do work that is detrimental on themselves. By the way, Poland is a very Catholic country. one of the oddities of the Eastern Europe, because not many nations in Eastern Europe of Slavic language are Catholic. Most of them are Orthodox, but also in Hungary you can see some Protestantism, and in the Czech Republic. But for them, for the Polish, the realities of being involved with the Catholic Church actually helped them be together with Hungary in the first wave of inclusion into the European Union. The whole PHARE program, PHARE, it's an acronym that sounds like the beacon of light, phare, pharos from Greek, in French, phare, which means the lighthouse, was the acronym starting from Poland and Hungary Aid for Economic Redevelopment in French. So it started with them. They were accepted the first in the European Union immediately after 1989. Romania became, for example, a member of the European Union only in 2007, together with Bulgaria. So because of these ties of Hungary and of Poland through the church, first of all, but also through other economic connections, they were accepted as ready for democracy, as considered by the Western world. But ready for democracy meant accumulation of wealth, accumulation of power, and a rebirth of these nationalist ideas, that they can overcome the situation of losing territory, especially for the Hungarians after the First World War, and maybe they can conquer them economically and then again physically as territories. But imagine what that would do to Europe and to the world if somebody would try to move borders now. There will be another war. So thank you very much for your research. Any questions for Elise from the public? Yes, Nancy.
So Elise, I thought that was really, really interesting. I have a question about your two themes, that and sort of the political implications of them. So it looked like there's slightly different demographics for each one, right? So that the sort of nostalgia you said was older working class people who grew up under communism, and women who had more services and more freedoms under communism, and then the sort of white supremacist nationalist group, I'm guessing, is more men and maybe younger people who didn't grow up under communism. So I'm wondering, is it true that these are sort of two mutually exclusive constituencies, or is there overlap? And what do you think the sort of political implications going forward in terms of these two trends are going to be?
I think they kind of go hand in hand, because with people having nostalgia, it kind of brings them back to a more conservative time as well. And it's still good. It's just that they have nostalgia, but at the same time, it's I think that also kind of amplifies their nationalism in a way, because they're oh yeah, it's we used to be all great. Let's go back to there, and then that kind of has more conservative tendencies to it and ideologies. But with their groups, at least, it's I think the main thing that probably overlaps is the older generation that is probably thinking that it's oh yeah, that's probably also having nostalgia and nationalism. But
okay, so my confusion is, or at least my thinking is, if it's nostalgia for a communist order, sort of communist political system is very different from this kind of, right-wing parties. So does that have any kind of political clout, or is it somehow just getting merged into national pride and, the lack of personal freedoms?
I think it's just kind of getting merged, but at the same time, I think that their nostalgia is for the past, but it's also how they view the past. It's not like they miss certain aspects of it, but there are pros and cons to it, so they kind of also get merged, and some people just view the communist socialist past as their childhood, so they that memories and feelings kind of get merged.
Okay,
with that as well. I don't know
Yeah.
if that answered your
Yeah,
question, but
I would like to add here that actually we shouldn't forget that in the first half of the 20th century in Europe and Russia, these two tendencies of getting the population from under some totalitarian regimes in the old sense, kingdoms and empires, into a modern state organization meant liberation of people who were before that most of the times under more medieval relationships. Aristocracy, king having all the power in the state, and some people being just tied to the land. And then, an event like the First World War provoked a lot of changes in Europe, a lot of falling of kingdoms, and the most significant one was the Tsarist Russia. But don't forget that both nationalistic movements and changes into the structure of societies in Europe, communism and what the Germans called Nationalsozialismus, right? And the Nazis, it was socialist nationalism, right? So that is where I see this kind of superposition of the two tendencies in Hungary, for example. They have a nostalgia for communism, but for a time when there was just one ruling party, which is very much similar to Nazis. Don't forget, Orban is one of the heroes of former President Trump, and he would like to use the same model if he comes back to power. Okay, he quoted from Orban a lot of times when he was president. So think about it. Okay, any other questions for Elise? Thank you very much, Elise. Let's move to River, and she will present herself and the topic of her research.
Okay, hi guys. I'm River. My focus area in international studies is for development and sustainability, and I was inspired to do my topic based off of what I had seen and kind of heard while I was studying abroad in South Korea earlier this spring. I stayed there for 5 months, and about 5, and I will share my screen. I think it's this one. Okay. Can you guys see this okay? Good. Okay, cool. I think I can hide this somehow. Okay. Oh, that's not what I wanted. That too. Okay. All right. So my topic is about suicide in South Korea, and the title of my project is The Meaning of Death, Suicide in South Korea. I do just want to say a disclaimer before I do this of judging from the title, there's going to be a lot of dark stuff talked about in this. And there will also be many issues related to women in this, and just overall, it's a very heavy topic. So if you need to leave the meeting, you can leave the meeting. That's okay. And there is one picture in here and about eating disorders. So if that might be triggering to you, also totally feel free to click off. That's totally fine. Okay. So some of the topics that I'm going to be discussing is a brief history about kind of Korean culture and its founding pillars, and a history of the Korean education system. And then I will be directly talking about the Korean education system, bullying, and the workforce. And then I'll move on to specific information about suicides, and then women and societal pressures. And then to wrap it up, I'm going to be talking about diet culture, Kim Jong-un, and my conclusion. Okay, so a brief history is there's two kind of main pillars of Korean culture, which is Korean Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism. And these are different than the Chinese forms of Confucianism, because the Korean form kind of strives towards one person becoming a sage, or in Korean it's a sumin, And that means you dedicate your life to learning no matter what your job is. So like if I work at a retail store, it's not necessarily me learning more about my job. It's me telling myself of, okay, I have to learn more about how the world works and staying up to date with current events and things like that. And Neo-Confucianism also kind of goes hand in hand in that it stresses the importance of moral education. So basically, the more you learn and the more you dedicate yourself to education and just learning, the more good you are as a person. And another big part of Korean culture to note is the concept of filial piety, which is having a deep respect towards your parents and towards the elderly, even if you're not related to them. And Korean Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism were kind of influenced by the Chinese imperial exams, but they're not exactly the same. And those exams were anyone in the entire country could take an exam and then become part of government. So that kind of shaped Korean Confucianism, Neo-Confucianism, because they saw, oh, the Chinese are doing it, you can become part of the government. So Korean Confucianists made that into, oh, well, if you are continually learning, then you could improve your life a lot. And one thing to note is that compared to the West's individualist mindset, especially the United States, very self-centered mindset, South Korea is much more collectivist. So that's like they focus on the greater good rather than what will benefit me as a person. Okay, and then just a little brief thing about the Korean education system. Most schools hold classes from 8 a.m. until 6 p.m., 5 days a week, and schools used to be 6 days long, so it would go from Monday through Saturday. And they ended that in the early 2000s. They cut it down to 5 days a week. And then nearly all students attend what are called hagwons after school until 11 p.m. And those are like private study academies. And it's not required for you to attend one of these, but most students do it. So it's kind of like a thing of if you're in a classroom, everybody's going to do it. And if you're not the one who's going to study, then everybody's going to look at you like, why aren't you studying too? And some kids begin studying for what's the infamous college entrance exam or the suning as early as 4 years old. And obviously, it's not like you're handing a 4-year-old an SAT practice book. It's you start giving them exercises that are like mock college entrance exams, but at the 4-year-old level. And then just some other little facts here. Korean parents pay close to $1 billion in total for a whole year for private tutoring for the suning. And students are highly encouraged to learn English for their entire school career, and other languages that are taught are Mandarin, Chinese, and Japanese. Okay, so more on the suning. You guys might have heard about this. It's kind of infamous because it's an 8-hour-long exam and it covers a ton of subjects like math, Chinese characters, an extra foreign language, English, social studies, all sorts of stuff. And it is taken so seriously that planes are either redirected from flying over certain parts of the country or they don't fly at all that day to disrupt possible distractions. And a lot of businesses start their days later, and the general public, are advised to not take public transportation like the subways and buses in order to let the students get to testing sites or the schools. And I'd learned this from one of my friends that I studied with in Korea, who is a Korean citizen. And he said that if you score more than 2 questions wrong on the test, you're most likely not going to get into any good universities, and not even like the top universities, but just decent ones. So like, for example, SIUE, it's not Harvard, but if you failed 2 questions on the SAT, you probably wouldn't get into a school like SIUE. So kind of puts it into perspective. And so some of the effects of intensive education are that about half of Korean students have stated that they have a psychological disorder, and almost 30% believe that those are caused directly from like the intensiveness of having to focus every day for studying and focusing on education so much. And fellow students in here, we all know that we're all going to experience mental hardship, and this is the same for Korean students. And a lot of Korean students have also reported at some point from elementary school to the collegiate level that they have either temporarily or permanently developed some form of a mental disorder. And a lot of the common ones are insomnia, depression, anorexia nervosa, anxiety, etc. Okay, and another really big thing that is leading to suicides in South Korea is the bullying problem. And it's prevalent in all demographics of society, but it most commonly appears in the young student population. And over here, I have some little quick bullet points of cyberbullying is the most common form because Korea has one of the world's most like highly accessible internet. It's really quick, it's really fast, and everybody's using it. So cyberbullying is like the number one thing. And physical bullying is also very frequent. If any of you guys saw this K-drama called The Glory, that was based off of real cases to where like a girl in the K-drama, like the bullies burned her skin with a hair straightener and like stuck tacks in her legs. Like that happened to real people. And like I said, bullying happens at every school level from elementary through collegiate. It just looks different in each level. But a recent piece of legislation has been passed in Korean Parliament. It won't be starting until 2026, but perpetrators of bullying have to put on their university application forms that they were bullies, and this will stay on their file for up to 4 years and has to be included on job applications as well for the same amount of time. So what that means is if they get in trouble or they are reported for bullying at a school, that means that they have to put that on their application forms. And if that were to happen, universities are highly unlikely to admit someone in who has records of bullying on their forms. And the same goes with job applications. It'll be much harder to find a job. On the flip side of this is parents bullying teachers rather than students bullying other students. And a really, really recent case of this was in September of 2023. An elementary school teacher ended her life because parents were bullying her horribly. What had happened was one of the students in her class didn't have the best grades, and the parents were very unhappy with that. So they sent hundreds of messages to the teacher's personal phone number and had harassed her on social media for months, went outside of her house and would regularly shout at her windows, like hateful things. And the really sad part about this is that she was found dead in her classroom by her students, who were elementary school kids. So these were very little kids. And the main reason why parents have been bullying teachers a lot more, why there's been a spike in teacher suicides, is because of something called the Child Abuse Protection Act, or CAPA, and it's not being used correctly. So it allows for anybody who suspects someone else of abusing children to be reported. So if I thought that this person was abusing a kid, I don't have to have any evidence, I don't have to have anything. I can go to the police, report them, and they'll get in trouble for it. And cases like these have to be taken very seriously because Korea kind of is notorious for domestic abuse as well. So even if the claim is completely false, it will be investigated like very, very quickly. And so parents have been completely abusing this law by they report teachers for disciplining kids or for simply telling their kids, no, you can't do that. And if their kids don't have the best grades, even if they didn't do the proper work to earn the grades, parents will still report them. But if a teacher is accused of child abuse, they will immediately lose their teaching license, and it is almost guaranteed that they won't be able to teach ever again. Okay, and my next section is about the Korean workforce. So for a full-time position in Korea, the minimum hours you can work is 52. Many people do closer to 70, and actually about a couple weeks ago, there's been a proposition in Korean government to make the max 70 work hours, which is a lot. I wouldn't want to work 70 hours a week. And there's specifically a word in Korean for meaning working to death, kwarosa. And there were 200 reported cases of this in 2022, although the number is probably so much higher because no company wants to say that they basically work their employees to death. So that number is very, very low, even though people know that it's much higher than that. And a specific job that is being affected by the high working hours is the delivery driver job. And so delivery drivers on average work 90 hours per week. And before they have to make deliveries, they have to hand sort all of their packages, which takes about 4 hours to do. I saw this in a documentary. And they're not paid for those, even though it's stated in their contract that they will be. They're not paid for those. And drivers are paid per package and not with a fixed wage. So each package that they deliver can get them anywhere from like 60 cents to $1.13. So they don't have a fixed wage. It's simply about how much they can get done. And another relatively recent case of a delivery driver that kind of sparked protests across the nation and a revival of workers' rights and labor unions in Korea was the death of Im Kwang-soo. And he died in 2021. He had a brain hemorrhage while working, and he was only 48 years old. But he was packing up the packages in his truck, and he just fell over and died. He was working over 100 hours a week, and that's not counting the 4 hours every day that it takes to sort the packages. So probably much higher than that. And the reason why he was working so much was during the pandemic, his company had upped his hours, but after the pandemic, it kind of dwindled down. They didn't let him go back to regular hours. And whenever he had passed away, his company said, oh, it's his old age. He had health issues. He had no prior health issues, and he was only 48 years old. So it was definitely a case of kwarosa, to where he worked himself to death. Okay, and this is just kind of another visual of how many issues are contributing to South Korea's suicide crisis. This is not everything, but this is a lot. Like, you can look at this and go, oh wow, like cost of living, education, long work hours, diet culture, beauty standards, mandatory military service, elderly poverty. And I didn't even get to talk about a lot of these in my essay. Otherwise, it would have been way much longer than I could have fit in the paper. But these are just some of the things, not everything, but this is a lot. And 43 people each day end their lives in Korea, and that's one person every 34 minutes. So by the time that Joseph finished his presentation and about 4 minutes into the start of mine, one person has already ended their life in South Korea. And a really kind of unique to the Seoul metropolitan area and kind of Korea as a whole is the bridge suicides. And since the beginning of 2022, over 3,000 people have ended their lives from jumping off of one of the 31 bridges in Seoul. And this picture here is, I don't know exactly what bridge it is, but it's a picture, it's one from Korea. And the bridges are equipped with special CCTV and different cameras, and they're lined with benches that have like comforting phrases on them. And one bridge that's really kind of infamous is the Mapo Bridge, and it was temporarily dubbed the Bridge of Life to try and curb suicide rates. And a lot of people critiqued it, and they said that that was very tone deaf and insensitive to say. And actually, after it was called the Bridge of Life, like suicides off the bridges went up. Like that specific bridge, it went up. And people from across the country go to Seoul to jump off of that specific bridge. And when I was studying in Korea, my bus would pass underneath the highway that the bridge was on. And I noticed that the railings were really, really high on it. And I didn't think anything of it until I was in different parts of Seoul, and I noticed the railings were much lower. And Mapo Bridge is one of the only bridges in Korea that has barrier heights that are over, I think, 6 feet tall. And like I have here, most bridges, the railings are shorter than 5'1", and the average height for women in Korea is 5'1", and for men it's about 5'9". So that's very easy to just go over. And each bridge also has multiple suicide hotline phones, but attempters say that because it's so close to the road, they can't hear psychologists on the end of the line. So even if they call and are wanting help, they can't hear what's being said. And this is one of the phrases that's really common on the bridges, on the benches, is "밥 먹었어요?" which is like, have you eaten yet? And it's really hard to describe unless you are there in Korean culture and know it, of like, have you eaten yet? Like, they don't have a phrase for how are you? They don't have a phrase for like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? It's this phrase, like, have you eaten yet? And it's such like a culturally important phrase that seeing it on all of the bridges, oh, they're about to make an announcement.
The Got Your Six support dogs and the hot cocoa bar are both going on right now on the first floor of the library. Take a break from the study, relax for a couple of minutes with a hot cup of cocoa, and or sit with one of the pups we have here this morning. Have a good day.
That phrase is very culturally important for people. And so attempters who have survived has said that seeing this phrase kind of makes them feel like the Korean people are with them. But yeah. Okay, and then my next section is about digital suicide culture. And this is really kind of concerning because how I talked about cyberbullying earlier with Korea's very accessible internet, there's all sorts of things out there. And suicide forums are really, really popular in Korea. So think Reddit, but the only topic that's talked about is suicide. And users on those on those forums talk about how they're going to end their lives, what they're going to do. And if people are questioning if they should do it, they're encouraged to go through with it. And another thing of like, live stream suicides are becoming really, really popular, and it's hard to stop them because that kind of gets into the line of censorship and the freedoms of media and stuff, of curbing them, because since it happens so quickly and it's live streamed, it's really hard to stop them. But people who are live streaming their suicides say that they're doing it so that someone will either be with them when they end their life, or that maybe they can have someone to convince them not to because they feel like they have no one else. And on the flip side of the advancedness of technology is suicide among the elderly in Korea. And here's just kind of some quick facts here. More than half of the seniors in Korea are living in poverty. 60% of those who are over the age of 60 still work nearly full time. And 30% of all suicides in the country are done by elderly citizens, so like 60 and above. But seniors in the countryside, so in rural provinces, are twice as likely to end their lives as compared to their urban counterparts. And a lot of different methods that they do, since these areas are very rural, is most commonly they drink pesticide because of their old age, they're unable to tie nooses or climb up enough stairs to jump off of a high building. And elderly people in Korea see suicide as a way to not burden their family members, even if they're not living with them anymore. And just something to think about is, we hear all the time in the news that Koreans' population is aging and that there's the lowest birth rate in the world. And we have to think about how we are going to develop better mental health resources for people of all ages, especially those who are older. And even though the United States doesn't have an elderly suicide problem, we need to think about mental health for elders in every country, I think. Okay, and my next section is about women in Korea. And so here's about women in the workforce. They earn 31% less than their male counterparts do. So the US, the gap is somewhere like in the teens, I think, last I checked. But in Korea, it's like 31% is really close to 50 if we think about it, and they earn that much less. And more women are more likely to be unemployed because sexist employers do not want to hire women. They think of, oh, you won't be able to do the work and you might have a baby, even though they have the world's lowest birth rate. But for women who do have jobs, they'll often get bullied by their coworkers if they take maternity leave. And a really notable case of this was a female employee who worked for a company called Naver. And Naver is like the Korean Google. And she took a single day off. She did one day of maternity leave to attend her preschool daughter's graduation. And then for months, her coworkers harassed her online. They like socially isolated her in office settings. No one would eat lunch with her at the office, things like that. And they contacted her family. They bullied her family to where she eventually ended her life because it was so bad, because they thought that, oh, you're taking time away from work to go with your child. But then on the flip side, it's, why aren't you taking time to go be with your child instead of being at work all the time? It's a double-edged sword for women. And another really, really, really big problem in Korea is the Mulka epidemic, which means hidden cameras. So what it is in public bathrooms, perpetrators will place hidden cameras that are like minuscule in public bathrooms. Like you'll think it's a chip of paint of how tiny it is. And they place these in public bathrooms in either little crevices or like on the stall walls, but they're so tiny that you can barely see them. And so they record more than 90% of the time they're recording women using the bathroom. And then that footage is re-uploaded to illegal porn sites. And sometimes women will will have no idea that they were a victim of this crime. But when I was in Korea, sometimes you would see like toilet paper stuffed into little crevices in the walls. It's probably a hidden camera that people found. And they also, at a store called Daiso, which is like the Korean Dollar General pretty well, they would sell these little sheets of red film that you'd place over your phone camera. So like you would place over your phone camera, and whenever you turn a flashlight on and hold it here, it would reflect back off of the camera lens. And just the fact that that product is so widely accessible that the problem has not been solved itself, but it's like, oh, here's something to try and spot it, is concerning. And also with digital sex crimes, there were more than 17,000 reported cases in 2021, but many cases go unreported. And less than 2% of perpetrators of placing hidden cameras or who have done digital sex crimes will ever see jail time. And almost always these perpetrators are men. But on the flip side, 70% of women who report or find a hidden camera get no legal action against the person who recorded them. So that's blatant sexism in legislation. And the police response to this is interesting as well, because in Korea, the police are trusted much more than they are here in the US. They have less criticism, and most victims who say that they have found a camera have said that the police have interrogated them for up to a day rather than taking the case seriously and going, okay, we're going to try and track this down. And many women are even told by police to just not report it because it might ruin a man's life. And out of those less than 2% of perpetrators, the average sentence for those who do get prosecuted is less than 5 years. And most people will barely even be in there for a year or so. And another thing that really affects women in particular in Korea, this affects men as well, and people of all genders. But this is really, really harsh against women of the beauty standards. And there's even videos on YouTube of, do you fit the Korean beauty standard? Do you have this? And some of those standards include of having pale skin, 90-degree shoulders. And what I mean by that is, so you have your shoulder here, right? And how your neck goes here, and then there's kind of a slant up and then back down to your shoulder. This muscle right here people say that in Korea you shouldn't have that, because if it's just a 90-degree, that looks more clean cut. And you might be thinking of like, what? Like, how do you even notice that? But it's very little things like that that women have to try and strive to do. And another thing is long hair for women. So women who have a haircut like me, people would probably bully them very harshly. Armpit brightener is also another thing. It's sold in like a tube, like kind of like foundation, to where it's sold in a tube and it has a sponge on the top and you squeeze it and it'll come out. And the reason why it's so popular is people say of like, you don't want to have people screenshot your armpits and post it all over social media and make fun of you, but it's like no one was looking there anyway. And constantly wearing makeup is another thing. A lot of women that I saw in Korea wore makeup, and that is also something that men are encouraged to do as well. Not makeup as in like eye makeup, mascara, but just foundation. Like men are also encouraged to wear makeup as well to present yourself well. And nearly a third of Korean women have had some sort of cosmetic procedure, whether it be plastic surgery, or the most common one is the double eyelid surgery, for going from monolids to double eyelids. And it's really cheap too. It's typically you can get a surgery for less than $1,000, and it's quick, easy, safe, and a lot of Korean women do it. And it's so common that parents even offer it to their daughters as a graduation present. And another really big beauty standard is being skinny. So compared to the US, to where we have more of a just kind of come as you are movement, Korean women are highly encouraged to diet and to be skinny. And people of any gender, men, women, others, are bullied horribly if they're not thin enough. Like there's even a phenomenon on the Korean internet called like bone beauty, which is you achieve true beauty if your bones are showing. And that's kind of my next section of diet culture. And so in Korean society, it's totally normal to discuss someone else's weight, and many people are encouraged to diet. And I use the word diet very, very loosely, because a lot of women online in Korea will challenge themselves to 500-calorie diets in a day. And it's like, that's like 2 apples, like it's not actually a proper, nutritionist backed diet. And this has obviously led to a rise in eating disorders, and more people are dying because they're starving themselves to try and achieve beauty and beauty in their standards. And this is really hitting young girls hard in Korea, like very young girls, like teenagers from like 11 to 17 are some of the highest buyers of these products called ditamines, which are better known as butterfly pills. And you can't really see it, but they kind of look like a butterfly, but they're called that also because they're supposed to make you beautiful like one. And they will make you lose weight. That's one thing that they will do, but they also lead to the development of schizophrenia, multiple types of cancer, high blood pressure, development of other mental illnesses. And if you take them for too long, they will kill you. And they were originally made for people with a BMI over 30 to like help with their weight loss. But these young girls are already severely underweight from dieting so hard that they do this to where they have no appetite at all. That's what the ditamine does, is it makes you have no appetite at all. And then it will kill you if you keep taking them. And people who are also scrutinized for this, especially, are celebrities. And so a really notable case of this was a member from the group EXO named Schumann. And he went on a diet that consisted of 4 cups of coffee a day and 1 small meal every other day. And by small meal, I mean like a bowl of rice this big, or maybe an egg. And this is a before and an after picture. He was 5'8" at the time, and he dropped to 93 pounds. And you can see that this was not uncommon to see people who looked like this when I was in Korea, and it was really sad. But yeah, celebrities are often the pinnacle of the beauty standards and diet culture. And talking about celebrities is probably one of the most notable celebrity suicide cases in all of Korea was the death of Kim Jong-hyun, or Jong-hyun Kim. I wrote the American way also, but Jong-hyun passed away in 2017. He was very harshly cyberbullied, especially by a lot of like nationalist men who felt like he was challenging the masculinity in Korea. He liked to express himself with fashion. He wore more makeup than was socially acceptable. He was a fierce advocate for women's and LGBTQ plus rights. And people always said that he was overweight, even though you see in these pictures, this is what he's looked like his whole life. And his death in 2017 really shook Korea. And I've been a fan of this group, the group that he was in, since a very young age. And whenever that happened, it wasn't just Korea, it was, you know, Asia, it was the music industry as a whole. His death really shook a lot of people because they didn't expect it, they weren't prepared for it. And everyone soon afterwards was like, why would he do this? Why would he say that? And then, you know, defenders of him would say, this is how you've been treating him for so long. And this is how a lot of people in your country are also treating each other. So it's not uncommon for this to happen. And from his case on, there's been a lot more suicides by celebrities. And when I was studying in Korea, there's a singer from the group Astro called Moonbin. He was 25 and he also committed suicide. Pretty well the same thing happened again. It was like history was repeating itself. Koreans were saying, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Rather than stepping back and realizing that there's a lot of problems to address.
River, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you have many more slides? Because I would like to allow some questions at the end, and we should.
Yeah, I only have like two.
Thank you.
I only have one more. Sorry.
Thank you.
Lost my train of thought. Oh, and when I was in Korea, I attended a event for in memory of Jong-hyun, and they had donated over 25% of the proceeds to mental health charities and suicide response centers. And I thought that stuff like that was really helpful because it helps to normalize talking about suicide and mental health in Korea, because it's really not talked about at all. And kind of wrap it up, of what can we do to help? You know, it's something to where we can't, as Americans, we can't go over and fix the problem in Korea or whatever part, but just talk about it. Talk about it with anyone that you know. Talk about it to your elders about how are they doing. Talk about it to the friends around you, to the people who you don't really check in with much. See how they're doing. Check in with people who you would never suspect they're struggling. And the biggest thing that I would say is be mindful of how you approach it. Know when to step back and let the person tell their story to you, and be kind in the language that you use. And in my paper and in this presentation, I didn't say the phrase commit suicide once, because this makes it sound like these people are committing a crime, which they are not. It's a public health crisis that we have to treat it as such. You know, your brain is an organ, your brain can get sick as well. And so I would say treat people with kindness in terms of how you approach these, check in with people, and really just kind of be an advocate for mental health where you can, and especially in communities that don't typically talk about mental health. And that's it.
Well, thank you very much.
That's all I got.
That is why I like working with students in the International Studies program, because these final presentations, capstone presentations, were taken around the world in different cultures, in different situations, and we can see another facet of human life in other countries. So I would urge all three of my students in 499 to post their final presentations, and soon the final paper on the Blackboard shell that we are using for INTS 499. So make sure that we are in compliance with what is required for the course. By the way, any question for River at this moment? I would have liked to know how does the bullying of any kind and the rates of suicides compare to what's happening in the United States or in other parts of the world. Is South Korea one of the the impact on these issues is bigger in South Korea than in everywhere else?
Definitely. Suicide in like Korea actually has the world's highest suicide rate out of every country in the world. Japan is a close second, and like for a couple years they would go, Japan would be one, Korea would be one, but for a couple years now, Korea has actually been the world's highest, has had the world's highest suicide rates.
Yeah. And it seems all the conditions are there for such gruesome things to happen. You are forced to underfeed yourself through diets, then you are cyberbullied or bullied in person, and you are overworked. Of course, these things will happen. Yes. Yeah. I remember when I was reading about situations of overworked men in Japan, that they were walking on the street and either they were falling asleep or dropping on the sidewalks because they were so tired that they couldn't make it back home. It's something amazing. Yeah. So any other questions for River?
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
You're talking about where the test was to get into college, were about was it only
Questioning.
it could only
Like
miss
the entrance exam.
missing more than 2 questions would be detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
What is like the standard in terms of getting employment out with getting into college and graduating from college, or without, if you don't make it in because you missed too many questions or whatever, because that's a very number of questions that you're allowed to miss.
Yeah, it's definitely not. It's very hard. So if you compare it to the US, you can pretty well flunk your SAT or SAT, both of them, and you can still get a job. And in Korea, it's much more difficult to get a job, even like at a convenience store or just a part-time job. But there are still very low-level jobs, particularly one of them that a lot of college graduates or people who weren't able to get into college do is delivery driving. Kind of like how in the US it used to be if you couldn't finish high school or if you couldn't do college, you would do truck driving. That's kind of where a lot of Koreans will end up.
Okay. So you have to not flunk your SATs to be a person who's working 100 hours and sorting all kinds of mail, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, any other questions for River?
I had one.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I know that in the United States, there's in the past like 50 years or so been an influx of people like being diagnosed with mental health illnesses, but it's because there's less stigma around talking about it. Is there stigma around diagnosing and seeking help and treatment in Korea, or is it pretty normalized to discuss it?
It's kind of I guess you could say a double-edged sword of everyone knows in Korea that there is a suicide problem, and everyone kind of just collectively recognizes that, oh, we all have it, of different things like that. And so if someone were to say like, oh, they have mental illness, it's not that they're not taken seriously, but it's like, oh, well, I have it too, so it's not that big of a deal. But on the flip side, like how I was talking about the different celebrities, whenever someone does end their life, it's seen as a shock. So it's one of those things to where it's kind of hypocritical or like contradictory type things. I hope that answered your question.
So they will have many shocks a day if you say that a person commits suicide every 34 minutes.
Yep.
Okay, I would like to wrap it up now because I will need some time to save this recording. Thank you very much for everybody who participated. Again, I would urge my students to post on Blackboard their final PowerPoint presentations, and when they are done, their final papers. Thank you very much, and thank you, Nancy, for inviting so many people. And I think all the students present here are from INTS 200, right?
Lily was in it a couple of years ago. Eve is in it now. Some of the others, I think, must be people's friends. And of course, you know, Dalton from last year.
Right. We have even alumni. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.